most of you know, I'm Moonwater, Executive Director here at the DRC, and what a fabulous array of folks who've joined us today, and some all of you very familiar faces. Lovely to see each one of you. So we have our August in-service about to get underway, and before we dive right into that, I just again wanted to say welcome to everyone for showing up today and for joining us. I'd love to just take a moment. We can do a show of hands just in the spirit of some efficiency and time today. Maybe you could either use the thumbs up signal if you have it, or just give a wave if you are an active mediator with the DRC right now. If you want to do a little wave if you're doing mediation for us, and maybe a wave if you do training for us. You're one of our trainers, okay? Maybe a wave if you're in the practicum program studying to be a mediator. All right. And maybe a wave if you're on our board. We have a couple board members. Fantastic. And a wave if you're on staff. So, okay, fabulous. So we have a wonderful array of folks who've joined us. And I like to take opportunities here at the beginning of each in-service as well, just to give you a quick update about the center. And they're just very briefly today, I'll share there's so many good things happening at the center, and so many trainings and services underway. Of particular note, I do want to draw people's attention to the most recent listening series that we've been helping the city and county with on race and justice. And there, we just completed the last session last night. And I encourage you all to tune in and listen to those. They're all on YouTube. You can Google City of Bellingham listening series on race and justice. And I invite you to tune into those and hear perspectives of community members and on race and justice. So thank you for joining us with those as well. And then I'd like to right now just begin to offer a very warm welcome to Chad Ford. I'm partway through his book myself, and just absolutely thrilled that he's able to join us today and to share his wisdom and perspective with us. And I'm going to pass the torch to our wonderful staff member, Becca, who helped us connect with Chad to do a proper introduction. So welcome, Chad, and thank you, Becca, for introducing him.
Yeah, thanks, Moonwater. Before I introduce Chad, I want to go over a few housekeeping things. If you have questions or any comments or anything throughout today's in-service, the chat box is going to be open, and we have some staff members that are fielding that throughout, and Chad is also going to be taking questions throughout today. So you can put it in the chat box, and we'll make sure that he sees it and answers it. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can raise your hand either physically or on a Zoom setting of raising your hand, and we will get to you as well. So we're just going to be fielding those questions throughout. So I'm really excited to introduce our guest speaker today. Chad is someone who is very, very special to me. I went to school at BYU-Hawaii, Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and Chad was my professor of conflict resolution out there. So he has over 20 years experience working in international conflict resolution. He is the author of a book, as Moonwater just pointed out, and we're going to be hearing lots about that today. He sits on the board and is a facilitator. He's a lead facilitator for the Arbinger Institute, which is a conflict resolution institute based out of Utah. He also is on the board of PeacePlayers International, which does sports through conflict resolution with kids. And that's where his intersection of these two lives he's kind of been living for the last 20 years. So you might know his name, Chad Ford, if you watch ESPN, anything to do with basketball. You probably have heard his name because he is very big in that realm as well. He was the NBA insider for ESPN for quite some time, but that was his side gig while he did conflict resolution. I was very lucky and blessed to be able to work with him. He was my boss and my mentor and my professor at school, and a friend of mine. So I'm excited to introduce him, and I know he has lots and lots to share with you all. So without further ado, Chad, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's really cool to have Becca introducing me. I don't know how well you guys all know Becca, but as a student, man, she was a go-getter from day one. I think the minute she started the program, she was in my office the next day wanting to know how I become a mediator, how I run the program, how can I get your job? I remember that we didn't have a lot of opportunities, but we had this really cool organization, the One organization that works, to fight extreme poverty throughout the world and sort of lobbies governments to give, 0.7%? You tell me, Becca, what was it?
Yes, it's at least 0.7, but the goal is up to 1%.
1% of the gross national product to humanitarian efforts. And it was a defunct organization. And within the matter of 2 months, Becca had us ranked as the top campus program in the country for one, which just like blew my mind. And so then I hired her into a job, and she actually helped us a lot with our mediation and our peer mediation and our work at the university. And so it's really cool to see her branching out and working with you all. And I'm so excited to be with you today. I just thought I'd do just a little bit of a brief introduction to me, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I hope will be helpful to you today, and recognize because we have actually quite a bit of time together, I'm going to take pauses throughout going through some slides and different things to get questions, feedback, group discussion, however we want to sort of handle that, to make sure that you don't have to try to save everything for the end, if you will, as we sort of move through some of this stuff. But I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and had a really powerful experience there growing up. I grew up in a very racially divided place in Kansas City. Kansas City was actually one of the last cities in the United States to resist desegregation of schools. And so there was still a lot of very segregated neighborhoods, segregated cities. I grew up in that environment and became really interested in conflict resolution even in high school, and got really involved in different things. Didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but really became really active in the community in high school. And then when I got to college, I didn't really know what to study. And so I went with a bunch of different things. I ended up on history. Don't ask me why, but I was actually studying a lot of historical conflicts is where I sort of decided I was going to go with that. And then I had a mentor who was a Native Hawaiian rights activist. I ended up in college in Hawaii. And I ended up studying Native Hawaiian history, as was actually my emphasis. I was just really fascinated by it, and really fascinated with this mentor professor who also worked as a human rights lawyer, working on Hawaiian sovereignty issues. And he really encouraged me to go to law school. And so I said I was going to go to law school with a great international human rights program. That's what I was going to do. Go to Georgetown and get into law school, and sort of like, man, I like the law, but I really want to work more directly with people, and not just when they're in the legal system, like, before that sort of happens, and on bigger and larger and structural things. And Dennis Ross, who was the chief peace negotiator for the US in the Middle East process, was a guest lecturer on campus one day. And after he got done speaking, I went up to him and said, I'm really interested in what you're doing, and how do I do more of that? And so he pointed me to George Mason University, that has a great school for conflict analysis and resolution. I skipped school the next day. I met with the man who became really my lifelong mentor, Wallace Warfield, who I was introduced to him because he was a master mediator who had worked with Dr. Martin Luther King, and had been the first African-American to work in the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service for the United States when that government entity was spinning up right around during the Civil Rights Movement. And after meeting with him for just a few hours, like, I sort of knew, okay, this is what I really want to do. And so I ended up doing a joint master's and JD at the time. I ended up doing my first real mediation gig in Ireland, where my ancestors are from. I have a family from both sides. They actually had to leave Ireland because a Catholic married a Protestant, and that wasn't really working out for either of them. And so they actually moved to the United States. And I went back to Ireland right during the peace accords in '98 and did work for the INCOR for the United Nations. And from there, I just really became fascinated with how to help people work through what I call intractable conflict, or conflict where people feel like there's no solution to this stuff. It's so deep rooted. It's been going on for so long. There's no clear solutions to things. And maybe it's my personality, I don't know, but I like the toughest stuff thrown my way. And so when I came back, I was like, how do I replicate that as a young mediator? And so I actually started doing child custody cases, which I found to be incredibly challenging and hard. And working with the Northern Virginia Mediation Society, working on those. And then eventually I worked my way back and began working in the Middle East, where I've been working very heavily for the last 15 years, both in grassroots conflict resolution with organizations like PeacePlayers and the Paris Center for Peace, as well as the US State Department, and working in the larger, more official peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. And deeply sort of embedded both in that conflict. Even though I'm in Hawaii, I go over there about 5 times a year, working on projects for the last 15 years, mostly in the West Bank, mostly working with Palestinians, as well as other projects that I've taken up all over the world, including a number of that are still dear to my heart in Hawaii, all around Indigenous rights and land and sovereignty and environmental issues that affect Native Hawaiians as well. And so that's my background. And while I was doing all this, I've been teaching and started a university program in conflict resolution at BYU-Hawaii. It's a school that has 3,000 students from 100 different countries. And what really fascinated me about that was trying to learn how to teach mediation when there's so many different cultural attitudes towards conflict, towards what's appropriate ways to resolve conflict, and trying to figure out how do you do this in a way that isn't just a Western style, but that can be adapted to different cultures, different conflicts, different ways of sort of thinking about what the role of a mediator even should be. And that's just been a lifelong passion. I love working with those students. They've gone out all throughout the world, starting projects and doing, really cool things. And in many cases, we just had to put our heads together and figure out what's going to work, in their particular area. And so out of all of that came a book that I just wrote, which was Dangerous Love, which is sort of my experience working as a mediator and doing conflict resolution around the world, and some principles that I've come back to again and again and again. And what I wanted to talk to you today, for those of you that are mediators, you may approach this little workshop a little differently. For those of you that are facilitators, and for those of you that are serving in other capacities, the one thing that has stood out to me over the years is the more I could prepare people to engage in constructive conflict with each other, the better the mediation or facilitation was going to go. To me, the key became over and over again, more pre-mediation, more pre-work, more preparation. My students heard this phrase a lot. It's in the book, The Long Short Way. If we spend a lot of time doing the prep work in the beginning, the mediation is short. If we spend a short amount of time in the prep work, the mediation is long, or sometimes never ending. And so it really became about training, for me, training people on some sort of 4 key principles about how to deal with conflict. And if I could get them trained up in that before we actually got to the mediation itself, magic happened. And it was so dramatic that, when I was a young mediator, I would say something in the neighborhood of maybe 50%, 40 to 50% of mediations were successful. If you just want to say successful and that we got an agreement, it was probably something more like 15 to 20%. If you wanted to talk about it being transformational, in other words, the mediation went beyond just a signed agreement, but they actually changed the way that they saw each other and interacted before. And I was never very satisfied with those numbers. It meant that I felt as a mediator, I was failing more than I was succeeding. And even on the ones that I was succeeding, oftentimes those people were going to end up back in mediation or back in court together again, because while we got to an agreement, we didn't really help them figure out how to solve their problems in the future. And so I became really obsessed about how to boost that number and get it up. Into something that would be more sustainable and something that would truly be transformative. And when I say transformative, I mean that the parties aren't just technically coming out with an agreement that they're problem solving, but they've actually fundamentally changed the way that they've seen each other in a way that allows for reconciliation. And so if it's okay with you, I'm going to put up some slides up here, and I'm going to share my screen. And let's see if this works. Okay, cool. And we called the book
Chad,
Dangerous Love.
Real quick,
Yeah.
this is Gail. I just want to point out we have some folks participating over the phone. So just as you're talking through the slides, describing a little bit more of what's on there could be helpful for the folks who are on the phone. And also for people who are on the phone, you should all be muted right now, but if you do have a question at any point, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. And then share that question. If you want to actually raise your hand and notify us that you have a question, you can press *9. So I'll mute myself again. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Gail. So I called the book Dangerous Love. I had a huge fight with my publisher about this and using the word love and the connotations that it has. And I'll talk through why I was really insistent on it. And a lot of it, again, was my mentor, Wallace Warfield, his work with Dr. King, and the role that he felt love actually played in getting to real conflict transformation. And it's something that's so deeply embedded in me that I decided I'm not going to shy away from this word that is very controversial and tough at times in this field, but we're going to do our best to get through it. So the first question that I ask people when we're in conflict is, why are we here? In other words, you and I together. And then, why are you here? And those may sound like they're the exact same question, but you often get really different answers. The first one is typically about why we're sitting in this space together. And the next one about why are you here, I actually ask people to take me on a journey of their life. I kind of want to understand what led them to this space in this relationship or this broken sort of conflict. And so I always start there, and I always find that people's journeys that they're going to tell me are going to be very telling in helping me understand how I might be helpful to them in the future, whether past traumas that they've gone through, past negative experiences with conflict, the past relationships that have failed or that have thrived together. All of these things culminate in the human being that's sitting with me, or the human beings that are sitting with me. And one of the things that I'm sure that most of you do is I try to destigmatize conflict, right? That it's okay that we're here together. Like, there's nothing wrong with you that we're in conflict. In fact, conflict doesn't have to be negative. For me, it's a very neutral term. We can have constructive and we can have negative conflict. And I just want to assure people that conflict isn't a stain on your character. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And it doesn't even mean that there's something wrong with the relationship itself. That it's okay to be in conflict. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to be all those things. And it's okay for us to be together right now. I can't tell you, even in my own life, how much shame at times I would feel that I'm in conflict and not want to talk about it because I just feel shame over it, and trying to destigmatize that and take away any sort of sense of shame that someone might experience or feel. And especially sometimes the shame and experience people feel when they have to go to a third party, right? So I wasn't able to solve this myself. I feel like I should be capable and able to do this, but I'm not able to do it. There's no shame in that, right? But we need help. And that's really important. So I use this definition in the book, and I want to just say up front, I recognize this is not the only definition of conflict, that there's many other important definitions that we could talk about. But again, I'm sort of thinking about when I'm working with a party one-on-one or a group of people that are coming in, and I'm trying to destigmatize the idea of conflict. One of the things that I share is it's our inability to collaboratively problem solve with people. And so I take them through this journey. In any relationship that you're in, you're collaboratively problem solving 20 to 50 to 60 times a day, right? There's little things you're putting your schedule together, you're deciding what you're going to do with your day every day, you have tasks you're going to do every day, you're deciding how to do that. Much of that is done with people. If you're in a partnership and you have a partner, you're figuring out everything from how our schedules are going to sync today to what we're going to eat. If you have children, then what we're going to do with those children and who's going to pick up who and who's going to help with homework and everything. And when it's going well, when collaboration's going well, we don't really experience conflict. It's just life. It's just like breathing. It's what we do every day. But the minute that we can't problem solve, right? The minute that my partner and I both have a meeting and someone needs to be picked up at school, is the minute that conflict starts to enter. Well, are you going to cancel your meeting or are you going to cancel your meeting? Well, who canceled their meeting last time? Well, which meeting is more important? Who carries a heavier load in picking up the kids after school or whatever? Like all of that stuff starts to come in. And if you can't get quickly to a solution, negative conflict or destructive conflict, as I say, starts to work its way into the system. I think it's why conflict gets a really bad name, because one of the things that you'll hear all the time with people when they come in and talk about their conflict is, I've tried and tried and tried to solve this and it won't solve. Nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change until they change. And of course, they're not really willing to change. And so, the next thing that I actually walk them through, and again, I'm sure you're really familiar, is like we can handle conflict in basically one of two ways. We can handle it constructively or we can handle it destructively. And the difference for me in whether it's handled constructively or destructively is fear, right? When I experience fear, either generalized fear of conflict or fear of the person or people that I am in conflict with, the path is typically going to go down a destructive path, right? Because of that fear that I'm experiencing. If I'm not experiencing that fear, generalized conflict, I'm not afraid of conflict, nor am I afraid of the person that I'm in conflict with, the opportunities for it to be constructive and collaborative grow dramatically. And I see over and over in my practice that people come in with both. They have a generalized fear of conflict in general. Doesn't matter who it's with or what it's about. They hate conflict. And then the second thing is, with that person in particular that they're in conflict with, there's a lot of fear that's growing on. And so this is I like to show people this. This is a artistic rendition of a brain scan. And this is someone who's experiencing a lot of fear right now. And what you're going to see is, as the brain waves are experiencing fear, the brain starts to move along predictable pathways, ruts, if you will, in the brain. And some of this is deep and biological. Some of this goes all the way back to evolutionary psychology and the fight and flight sort of instincts that people are experiencing. But when I have fear, my brain actually shuts down. It becomes blind to many, many things around us. And our brain starts operating in these very predictable patterns. And we learn these patterns when we're young, and they're really, really difficult to get out of. And I could give you a ton of examples, but we'll just if you can sit with that and hold that for a second. The next scan I'm going to show you is someone who's experiencing the experience of peace. This brain scan actually is from a yogi who has been meditating. And look at the difference in the pathways. And now if you think about, one of my jobs as a mediator is to help people collaboratively problem solve. Which brain would you rather work with? The A brain or the B brain, right? Look how many more opportunities there are with the B brain. Look how many potential solutions there are. Look at all the different ways that you could analyze and see a particular conflict with the B brain as opposed to the A brain. There's nothing unhealthy about the A brain or nothing necessarily particularly maybe this is a particularly amazing brain because it's a yogi who has been meditating and working on this, you know, their whole life. But look at what our brains are capable of sort of doing. But when I'm experiencing fear, my brain is going to look a lot more like this one over here at A, and the solutions are going to feel very narrow. Things are going to feel very confining, and it's going to feel like I don't have a lot of options in place. Whereas B, if we can get to B, right, things sort of explode, and so that that is why I use the term dangerous love, because unfortunately, to get to A to B is going to require a bit of a journey for me. Right, and I wish you that were on the phone could see these diagrams, but this is going to be recorded, and hopefully you can go back, and I can also send PDFs of this through as well if you would sort of like to look at this or be able to use it in your you know, in your own practice. But there's just a bunch of colored lines squiggling everywhere. So what do I mean by dangerous love? It's choosing love over fear in the face of conflict. It's choosing us. And if you think about in conflict, when I experience fear, self-preservation sort of kicks in. That's the primary instinct. How do I protect myself? And there's a number of different conflict styles that I could choose that could be protective of me. But where we're really trying to get in mediation and collaboration is to us preservation. How do I preserve myself? And one of the interesting things I find when people's attitudes about conflict is either I win or they win. And sometimes people put a lot of value on me winning. Sometimes, actually, interestingly, people put a lot of value on other people winning. And so, you know, I'm going to be an accommodator, and I'm going to be the martyr, and I'm going to give in and give them everything they want. And that's going to help me feel good about myself or the relationship or whatever. But that's them preservation. And what we're talking about is us preservation. And so while people hear love and think it's soft, it's anything but that, because to move from A to B is going to be experienced by most people as dangerous, because it's going to require vulnerability. It's going to require us to let go of our justifications that we have for being in the conflict. It's going to ask us to see people in ways that might be different from the way that we've been taught or the way that we have seen them in the past. And all of that's going to feel a little discombobulating. All of that's going to feel hard for us. There's going to be a lot of emotions involved. And it's something really courageous to engage in collaborative problem solving. For many people, the courage is going to be about uplifting my own needs and wants and desires. That's the scary thing. I work with so many people that the thing they're actually afraid of is to tell what they really want or need out of the conflict. And for other people, the scary thing is listening to other people and opening myself up for the solution that I want may not be the best solution for us. And therefore, I have to be open to alternatives. That could be the scary thing going forward. But I recognize up front that what we're going to ask here is dangerous love. And when I use the word love, sorry, I'm not talking about romantic love, and I'm not talking about the love that means like, right? That's easy love. And that's the term that I use for it. Easy love is the love where I feel attracted to the person, and so therefore I have that euphoria of love, or just that I like the person, we get along, they're nice to me, they remember my birthday, they buy me coffee occasionally, right? I mean, it's easy to get along with those people that see us and care about our dreams and desires and always feel like they have our back. That's easy. But what about the people that aren't doing that in the moment? And I find that even in our best relationships, there's moments where that easy love fails. And then we're left with what's left. And so the love that I'm talking about is a love where I see the other person's needs, wants, and desires so clearly that they matter as much to me as my own. They don't matter more, but they certainly don't matter less. But they matter as much to me as my own. And then the difficult process will be, now how do I both hold my needs with an open hand, hold their needs with an open hand, and roll up our sleeves to engage in some process where we can find a way to meet those together. And that to me is the essence of what real love is, not the easy love, but the hard sort of love, right? I care enough about you that I'm willing to put in this effort to make something that works for both of us. I don't have to like you to do that. I don't have to agree with you to do that. I don't have to hold your same political ideology, your same religious belief. I don't have to hold any of that, but I do have to see you. And so the book that I talk about, and I actually talk with my clients very early on about this, is we're going to work through 4 steps together. We're going to let go of our fear of our conflict generally. Then we're going to let go of our fear of people in conflict. Then we're going to do something called turn first, which I'll explain in a minute. And then we're going to talk about how we invite other people to turn towards us. And I'll explain turning in a minute and how we go through that. And so I'm going to walk us through these 4 steps briefly in our time together. And I'm even going to share with you a few of the exercises that I do with clients to sort of help them get there. And again, I'll share this slideshow with everybody at the end as well. And so, you're welcome to, take from it what you will. We also have a website that has some of these worksheets and some of these things that you can download for free as well, if they're interesting to you. But I'll just pause there for a second because I recognize I've been talking for quite a bit, and see if there's questions, if there's any feedback that people want to give right now before we start going into these 4 steps.
I just want to say how amazed I am. I mean, the things I'm a collaborative divorce attorney and a mediator, and I've been thinking about this stuff for years. And all the things you're talking about, it's like I keep wanting to say yes, 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 yes. It's stuff, that I talk about with my clients all the time. I've got a page on my website, Divorce with Love, and about
Awesome.
moving away from fear and turning back from fear and all of that. How fear is what gets in the way. So I love everything you're saying.
Thanks, Roy. And that's like, especially as you know, in divorce, the fear level is so high, right? Because our lives are about to dramatically change in these huge, huge ways. It's really hard to get people back into us, because the whole idea of divorce is there is no more us, like we're separating, right? And to get them back into that thinking, that's really,
right.
That's really cool. You have that practice.
And it seems, Chad, like you're doing, like in a collaborative model, we're using a coach, we're using a child specialist. All of that is about helping people get out of fear and stay out of fear and stay in connection. And you're doing it, you're trying to create that within the mediation model. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian. If there's other folks, you can, since we so many folks have joined, we can't see everyone all at one time. You can either use the raise hand function or cue us in chat if you have some additional questions. It looks like we have a question from Emily asking, is there a range of relationships where this is more or less effective to explain this framework? So thinking about the audience for this framework.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It obviously sounds more obviously connected to people that have a strong interpersonal relationship with each other, right? So if we're thinking about family, for example, or people that are closely connected in a workspace on a team together. What's really interesting is, while I'm interested in that work and did some of that work early on, I'm mostly using this model at large scale ethnic and religious conflict. And that's where people often are really surprised. They're like, well, I could see it with collaborative divorce or what have you, but how would you use this with Israelis or Palestinians, right, in general, when there's so many layers and complexity to the conflict? And I've actually found it works really, really well. And so I haven't really found a context as far as populations where it doesn't work. I will say that, look, not every conflict is deep, as you know, and some conflicts are just sort of material conflicts. Some conflicts, the people aren't going to have any ongoing relationship with each other than maybe at a specific point. And there might be times that there's a quicker and easier solution to get to, and we don't need to really engage in transformative mediation to get there. But it's interesting how much when I'm in the international sphere and I'm talking with international mediators, they're shocked that I'm doing this sort of work at that level. And, my response is always, look, these are people too, right? You can't just think of them as Palestinian, as Israeli. You can't just think about them as Hamas or Al-Qaeda. You actually have to think about them as individuals who are have all sorts of needs and wants and desires, and have feelings and experience fear, and who are experiencing the conflict not just at a systemic level, but also at an interpersonal level. And so while there may need to be big changes that happen at that systemic level, and we need to work on that, they're also experiencing the individual trauma of destructive conflict at a personal level. And that if you don't address that and work with people through that, you're never going to get to the really creative problem solving that it takes to dismantle the systemic part, right? You get those fear brains trying to handle complicated systemic issues. And then of course, why do we keep running up against walls, and why do they keep not coming up with really creative solutions to the problems? And until you go back and address that. So I can't tell you, and in fact, I have the story in the book that I tell much later, where I'm with a number of people from Fatah, which is a political party that operates in the West Bank for Palestinians. And we end up an hour into the session talking about their relationship with their kids and their partners. And we actually start moving through conflict that way and what sort of patterns they're seeing at home. And then we're able to extrapolate it all the way back out, right, to Israelis in a way that was just like a huge breakthrough in the meeting. But what the coolest thing to me was the feedback that I was getting afterwards about how a relationship had transformed at home, and how it had actually given them hope that they could actually do this in sort of other spaces. And so, you know, the other thing that I would just, you know, point out to people all the time, even when I'm doing organizational work as well, is that the conflict that matters most to people is the conflict that matters most. And, you know, for some people, that's going to be at home. For some people, that's going to be in their community. For some people, it might be the larger international thing. But the thing you might be there for may not actually be the conflict that matters most to them in the moment. And sometimes that's where you have to kind of move and navigate as a mediator to be able to get them to break through in the area that that they might be with you for. So I don't know if that answers every question, but I hope it's helpful. And by the way, if you want to know about age, we're doing this model in one of the projects we're doing in the Middle East with 14 to 16-year-olds right now. And by the way, they get it way better than the adults do. And there's some reasons behind that, I actually believe, sort of psychologically, with cognitive dissonance and what have you, that young people's brains are a little more malleable and flexible in this area than sometimes as we get older. Should we keep moving?
I have one more question. I can pose it to you now, and if it feels like a good time to answer it, great, or we could hold it as you move through. It's another question about sort of audience and application for this model, touching on domestic violence. And so the question is rooted in and maybe this is hearkening back to your days and times with custody mediation. But the question is, if you could speak to the limits of this approach in DV-related divorce cases, where that theme is used, maybe taken to a degree that could be unhealthy, and family pressure to stay in unhealthy situations.
That's a great question. Dangerous love isn't meant to literally be dangerous. In other words, that I'm putting my life in danger. So if I'm in an abusive relationship, for example, the dangerous part isn't put up with that abuse. And by putting up with that abuse, you're going to invite the other person to turn. I have to address that multiple times in the book, because that is unfortunately a common reaction sometimes with people. Oh, so what you're telling me is that regardless of how terrible I'm being treated or how badly I'm being mistreated here, what I need to do is love them through that. And the answer is no. And if I can hold on to that question, I think at each step I want to address that question as we go through this, because I think that there's an appropriate caveat at each of those steps where boundaries become really important. And that part of loving someone is also setting boundaries and holding those boundaries. And that people will actually accuse you at times of not loving them or not working with them because you've set appropriate boundaries for people and situations. So maybe one way that I can address that going through this is also thinking about the role that boundaries play in each of these steps. Would that be okay?
That sounds great. Let's dive into the model, and we can keep fielding questions through chat as they come. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's talk about seeing conflict. I love this map. I'm a geek. I told you I was a history major before. This is a real map. This was a Viking map from the 1500s. And it was the origin, if you've ever heard this phrase, there be monsters, right? And so if you look at this map carefully, you'll see that to the west of the coast, you'll see all these sea monsters. And if you look carefully, the monsters are destroying boats. There's actually people inside their bellies and what have you. And it was an essential warning to sailors that if they left the coast, if they ventured too far away from shore, danger was coming. There's also whirlpools there, and you know, all these sort of sea creatures that are there. And I use it a lot to say that, you know, we laugh at this map nowadays and say, okay, these sea creatures probably don't even exist, and that, you know, maybe it wasn't as dangerous as you think. But the perception is our reality often in conflict. And for many people, when they hear the word conflict, the idea of there be monsters are there, right? And there's things that we sort of see that we're afraid of in conflict that we don't have to be, as well as occasionally things that we do need to be aware of and alive to that actually could potentially be dangerous, right? So there's rational fears and sometimes irrational fears, but often our conflict has conjured up these monsters that aren't there. And so one exercise I take them through is I have them think of a metaphor that comes to mind for them when they think about conflict. Conflict is like to you. And I let them just go at it. And then I'll do a few more with them. So I'll run through this exercise several times. Like this one says, think of a specific person you're in conflict is. What does conflict look like with them? Sometimes I'll say conflict in the workplace is like, conflict in my family is like, conflict in my culture is like, if I'm working with religious actors, conflict in my religion is like. And I just want them to conjure up an image and then talk to me about it. And so, you know, the volcano is a very popular one. You know, conflict is like a volcano. It's dormant, but it could explode any minute, and it could spray hot lava over me. And I know sort of at that moment, if they're describing that conflict there's a lot of fear that they have about conflict. I hear about tornadoes, tsunamis, lightning strikes, fires. I mean, most of it's pretty depressing, right? When they're sort of thinking about that. But whatever their image is, I just like to explore it with them for a little bit. Tell me more about that. Explain why. Have you had experiences in your past where conflict has looked like that? And could you tell me a little bit about that, you know, going forward? Have you had experiences with this particular person that you're in conflict with where it looks like that, and help me sort of understand that going forward? And really, I'm trying to get people's orientation around conflict. I found that people can participate in this exercise pretty easily. They like to talk about it. It's just a great open-ended question. So here's another one: conflict in your organization. What metaphor comes to mind? And then I typically talk about two metaphors that I really like to think about this. And one is smog and one is cocoon. And the smog metaphor is a metaphor that I think is fairly indicative of people that have fear of conflict. And you think about smog for a minute. We know smog's not good for us. We know that when we breathe it in, it's bad for our lungs. We know that smog can cause cancer. We know that smog is bad for the environment. It can, if you live in an area where there is a lot of smog, it's really disruptive. But the other frustration about smog is it's hard to understand what to do about it as an individual. I can get a Prius, right? You know, I can be more environmentally friendly, but if not everybody else is doing that, there's very little that I can do to make a dent in smog. And so there's a lot of anxiety around the idea that conflict is with us, and there's very little I can do to control it. There might be small little things that I can do here or there, but for the most part, it's there, it's omnipresent, and it's coming after me. One day I had a student. She was from the tiny island of Palau. She was Micronesian. She's really, really brilliant student. And she had a different answer than everybody else in the class. And I was so fascinated with it. She said, conflict to me is like a cocoon. And everybody was like, what? She's like, well, now think about this for a minute. You're a caterpillar and you're walking along, you're eating leaves, you're doing your thing. But eventually you want to become a butterfly. And so you go into this chrysalis, and it's actually really, really tight, and it's confining, and it's dark in there for that caterpillar. And in fact, things that I learned later is the caterpillar actually sort of like liquefies. It's not, you know, a caterpillar is not, or a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings. If you've ever actually looked carefully at a butterfly, it's not just a chubby little caterpillar that's sprouted wings. It actually turns into a different creature. But when it's done, it comes out, it's a butterfly. It's beautiful. It can fly. And that's what I think about when I think about conflict. And I thought it was such a beautiful metaphor in some ways of thinking about constructive conflict. You notice that she still talks about some of the danger involved in conflict, that it's confining, that it's dark, that there has to be this transformation that happens that we don't really know, but might actually be quite painful for the caterpillar, right? But that it comes out the other side better, free, flying with wings, things and capabilities that didn't have before. And I've used these metaphors over the years to think about two particular types of view of conflict. Smog view being a negative perception of conflict, and it has these sort of ideas. Conflict is destructive, it's debilitating, it's suffocating. I can't really do anything about it because it's all coming from external sources, and until other people change, the conflict itself is never going to change. Conflict is out of my control, and nothing will change unless they change. And I would say that, we could all probably chime in on this for those of you that are mediators, that in the initial intake interview, the way that the conflict is described is in almost every case described in somewhat language like this, right? And it's partly why they're there to see a mediator, because they're so frustrated or they've hit rock bottom or what have you. To use this term that Folger and Bush use in their book, The Promise of Mediation, our narratives become weak and self-absorbed, right? Help me, she won't listen to me, why is he hurting me, I can't take it anymore. These sorts of narratives you hear over and over again, right? Why are they weak? Because they're out of my control. The conflict is out of my control. And why is it self-absorbed? Because everything is about me. She won't listen to me, help me, why is he hurting me? As if the conflict is unidirectional, right? Like I can only see the conflict through the lens of how it impacts me. I can't take it anymore. And so a cocoon view is an empowering perception of conflict. And how do I sort of change the story? And conflict is constructive. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an essential part of life. Conflict can change when I change. I'm empowered to transform conflict. And the thing that Folger and Bush saw that was the shift in the narrative was that it went from weak to empowered. I feel like there's something that I could do to positively contribute to this. And that instead of it being self-absorbed, it was now collaborative. I see my role and pattern in the conflict. I see that I can do things that can contribute to the conflict being destructive or constructive. And now I have a level of accountability about my role in the conflict. And when we have a cocoon view, we can see that clearly in the conflict. When we have a smog view, we see it through different lenses, and it looks and feels really different for us. The last one, others in this matter as much to me as myself. And then, like, what I like to do with my clients is just explore. It doesn't have to be the conflict that we're talking about. Can you think of times when you've seen conflict from a smog view? Can you think of times when you've seen it from a constructive view? Can you think of any experience in your life where you actually tackled this head on and you felt, or you had a positive experience with it? And while there are some people who are so paralyzed with fear and conflict that they can't think of anything, most people have answers on the constructive side as well. They'll actually come back and mine for memories of things when this has worked out okay. And that, it's a sort of a great start, right? Okay, so this is possible. It's possible to sort of see the same sort of phenomenon this way. And so there's a sort of conflict journals that I often have them go home with. Think about the conflict you're having right now in your life. What are the emotions that come to mind when you think about the conflict? What do you think about the person? Write down as many emotions and feelings as you can. And then I sort of ask themselves to label those. Are those smog emotions? Are those cocoon emotions? And a lot of times people aren't sure, and sometimes we'll unpack that together, because negative emotions could also be cocoon emotions. They don't all have to be smog. And we we work through that together so that I can start to see this pattern of perception that is going on in my life. Okay. And then I'll send you this later if you want to take a picture of this now and pull it up on your phone later. I just have a conflict styles online test that they can sort of take. There's many out there. I think I heard that you guys use some sort of diagnostic tool as well. This is just one that, you know, that I've used, that we've developed over the years, but based off the Thomas Kilmann, you know, model. And I'll actually have them take a conflict style sort of test afterwards as well. And then we can actually sort of go through that with them. And then I just sort of jump into conflict styles. These are the 5. I think for most of you, you're super familiar with this. And so I won't spend a ton of time on this, but a couple of things I sort of like to point out is these axes of unassertive and assertive and uncooperative and cooperative, right? Avoiding is both uncooperative and unassertive. Right, I'm neither working with you to solve the problem, nor am I really doing anything about the problem. Right, competing is very assertive, but isn't particularly cooperative. Accommodating is super cooperative, but it's not very assertive. Compromise, which we often, which a lot of people sort of hail as the right thing, I actually sort of think splits the difference, and then collaborating up in the top corner of being both cooperative and assertive in trying to get things done. And we sort of think about where we're at with this, and this is where I differ from a lot of mediators, and you can feel free to disagree with me, and we can have a long discussion about this. I'm open to being wrong about this, is I guess what I'll say, and try to be very humble about this. I read a lot that all conflict styles are good and that they're equal, and that, you know, whatever your conflict style is, it's totally fine and it's great and what have you. And my experience as a mediator is that all of them can be useful in certain contexts, but that if you're really thinking about relationship, and if you're really thinking about protracted problems and conflicts with people, there's only one of these that is going to get you a sustainable, long-lasting solution, and that's collaboration. That all of them can get you temporary wins, and sometimes temporary wins might be a good thing in the moment. But if you're thinking about long-term protracted conflict, you're ultimately going to have to move to collaboration. And I know that not everybody agrees with that, but it's just been my experience as a mediator that when we're pursuing those other conflict styles, it limits the possibilities of solutions that we can work on together, and then limits the effectiveness of those solutions long-term. And so I usually take them through these little ideas. These are all in the book, what they look like, how the need it fulfills, and what the sort of smog view of it is. So avoidance, running, hiding, ignoring, pretending, or suffering in silence in the face of conflict. Need it fulfills is protection. The smog view is it paints conflict in general as dangerous to the relationship, so I try to avoid it at all costs. Accommodation, always saying yes, giving in when others push back, feeling like you won't be loved if you disagree or speak your mind. The need it fulfills is to be liked or loved by the other person. And I think this is a sort of key aha moment for a lot of my clients. The smog view is it paints your needs as dangerous to the relationship, right? If I vocalize or speak my truth or about my needs or my wants or desires, it puts the relationship in danger, because maybe they won't like me anymore. Maybe they think I'm needy, or maybe they're going to think that I've been too hard for them. And so I'm constantly characterizing my needs as dangerous to the relationship. And I think we all know that over the long term, that's really an unsustainable way to live or to be in relationship with other people. Competition, arguing, debating, manipulating, forcing, trying to win the conflict. The need it fulfills is to be right. I know that may be a little bit crass, but you know, at the end of the day, like, I really, really value being right in competition, and that my way is the best way. And the smog view here is the opposite. It paints others' needs as dangerous to the relationship, whether it's because they're uneducated, or they're just, they don't get it the way that I get it, or that anything other than what I want is going to be harmful or detrimental to me. Competition sort of takes this sort of approach. And then compromise is, again, one where maybe I have a little bit different attitude on this to other people, but it's splitting the difference, dealing giving up things you want to get what others want. The need it fulfills is to be fair. A lot of talk about fairness here. But this smog view, we both need to win and lose to get a fair outcome, is something that I find that can be at times like a little bit problematic, in that, if I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the research that shows in mediations where you get to a compromise solution, that parties tend to hyper focus after it's over on what they didn't get out of the conflict as opposed to what they did. And so whatever they got, and it's with them now and they have it. And so when I come home, I start thinking about, well, I shouldn't have given up that, or why did I let them have that, or why couldn't they have also given me this in return? And that the actual sort of feeling at the end of the compromise is that they lost, even though during the time they probably signed off on it and agreed to it as being fair. That the perception morphs after the fact to that it wasn't fair and that I lost. And I'm sure the divorce mediators in the room can speak ad nauseum to negotiated divorce consent decrees and agreements that at the time people were generally okay with, and in the weeks or months to come, they're back relitigating it over and over again because it no longer feels right or fair to them anymore. And so when we talk about collaboration and valuing the needs of both yourself and others, creative problem solving, willingness to engage, even if you don't agree, the need it fulfills, and I think this is the key thing for me, is to be in relationship. That relationship requires collaboration. It requires us not only getting what we need, but also fulfilling the needs and helping other people fulfill their needs as well. And the cocoon view is we can solve problems together that meet both of our needs. And so then these are just a few little other diagrams: us preservation, collaboration, self-preservation. Again, when I'm avoiding, who am I really thinking about? I'm thinking about protecting me, right? Or I'm protecting my role in the relationship. When I'm accommodating, even though it seems like it's a very giving sort of style and I'm giving you what you want, I'm also getting something out of it that's really important to me, which is to be liked. And I'm afraid that I won't be liked if I get it. And so it really ends up being about me. I will agree to things that I know aren't good for us, that I know aren't good for the family or good for the community or whatever, as long as I'm liked and competing the same way. And then even compromise, I have the arrows going out here because compromise on the surface is I'm giving and getting. But a lot of times the mentality in the compromise is I'm maximizing my gains and I'm minimizing my losses, as opposed to sort of sitting with the other people's needs, wants, and desires. And this is sort of the homework I give. What is the outcome of using your dominant styles in conflict? And I just ask people again to go back and sort of think about, how has this worked in the past? You know, what styles have you particularly leaned on in the past? And how has it worked for you? And then I always get to the one of the conflict we're in right now. What style do you think you've been using, and how has that worked for you? And a lot of times people say, I think it's working great, to which my response is the very first question they hit: then why are we here? Right? If it's working great, then I go back to the very first question you asked: then why are we here? Because usually people that their conflicts are going great aren't in my office paying $300 an hour to have me mediate, right? So there's something going on here that's not as great as you say it is. And this is just a little chart too. Short-term gains versus long-term gains. You'll see depends all the way through compromise, because compromise so much depends on how I'm seeing the person that I'm engaged with. Sustainable, unsustainable, short, long, long, short. Fear motivated, love motivated, and you know, all of this is a way to get people hyper aware about where they're at, how they've been arguing, how they've been fighting in the past, hopefully to see that what they've been choosing in the past hasn't been particularly productive or helpful, and now where are we going to move that can be sort of helpful, and how can we let go of those other conflict styles and engage in collaboration? Can I get you to try that? Can I get you to put aside avoiding? Can I get you to put aside accommodating and just agreeing too quickly? Can I get you to put aside competing for a minute? And can I even get you to put aside for a minute, let's just split the difference and cut it in half and make everything fair? And can we just sit with collaboration for a while with the other person? And here are some of the tools that it's going to take to get there, which is in step 2. Okay, I'm mindful of our time. Wow, we've been in it for an hour. I'm going to just fly through the next step, and then we'll pause for a second and get to step 3. So the next step is a lot of work that I've been doing around self-deception, and what are some of the hangups we experience when we are bridging the gap between love and fear. Had a bad experience in the past, they won't change. I can't change. I can be not only afraid of the conflict, but afraid of the person I'm in conflict with. And I usually label these into 2 things, separation and self-deception. Separation is that as I get in more and more destructive conflict with a person, I emotionally, physically, everything separate from the other person. And I no longer am in touch and alive to them as I was before. When I'm working in the Middle East, that literally means building walls, right, between people and literally segregating. For a couple that's having a problem, it could mean literal separation, or it could mean we're just sleeping in separate bedrooms, or we schedule times together so we don't have to talk or eat dinner or talk to each other anymore. Maybe it's a more casual relationship. I just block them on Instagram, or whatever it is, right? Like I've created this sort of level of separation. And it's really hard to experience love and to experience collaboration when I'm emotionally and physically separated from the person. And then in self-deception is this problem of having a problem, not knowing I have a problem, and resisting any suggestion that I might have a problem. And so even when parties get in the room, if they're willing to get in the room, everything they hear from the other party tends to be rejected by them as unfair, false, not true, but what about you? And what about the things that you do? Self-deception is the problem of not seeing the role that I play in the conflict and resisting any suggestion that I play a role in the conflict, or that my role is important in the conflict. Some people say I play a role, but it's unimportant. Like what they're doing is the major thing. And both of these sort of keep us from bridging that gap of fear, right? Because as long as I'm separated from the person and I'm not connected to them, I'm experiencing an extra level of fear. And as long as I believe that I don't have any control or I don't have any part in this pattern, I'm also out of control, which also often leads to fear. And so we do some work around self-deception. There's the definition again. And one of the things that I just do, I know it sounds super simplistic, and maybe your clients will be offended. I love basketball. I have a basketball in my office. I just pick up this basketball and I literally just ask them, what's the difference between me and this basketball? And, they'll say, all the superficial things. But what I really want to get to is I have needs, wants, and desires, and the basketball doesn't, right? I wake up every morning and I have things that I want to do and accomplish and get through every day. The basketball doesn't, right? And because of that, it makes me unique. It's partly what makes a person, is that everybody has dreams and wants, desires. Everybody wakes up in the morning with things that they would like to happen, or frustrated or sad that things aren't happening the way that they wish or would like it to go in the world. When we see objects as objects, it's fine. But what happens when we see people that way? It's a denial that their needs, wants, and desires matter, right? And when they don't matter, right, that's to me where self-deception comes in. If I can't see that your needs, wants, and desires matter to you, even if they're different than mine, even if I think you've chosen the wrong needs and desires and wants, that they don't matter to you and therefore are invalid, and I don't have to take them into account when we're thinking about collaborative problem solving, we have created in my mind a self-deception. Right? We've deceived ourselves into believing that only some people's desires and needs and wants matter, and other people don't. This speaks to me all the way to individual relationships, all the way to the systemic violence and systemic racism that sort of exists throughout the world, that we've literally created structures that value some people and don't value others, that say some people matter and other people don't. And that we create laws and systems that, again, say that some of you are a you and some of you are an object, and it doesn't matter the same. And as long as we're doing that, it's impossible to collaborate because I don't feel any obligation or need to take into account your wants and desires in coming up to a solution to the problem. And then I just ask people, how does it feel to be seen as a basketball? And I get all sorts of great things here. That would really suck. You know, what do you do with a basketball? You bounce it on a hard floor, right? Do you ever feel like that? Do you ever feel like you're getting bounced? Do you ever feel like you're disregarded, right? I only pick up the basketball when I want to play with the basketball, right? The rest of the time, the basketball just sits on the shelf and it doesn't do anything. So it's only important to me. The basketball is only important to me when it's important to me. It's not important any other time. And we just walk through what it feels like to be seen as an object. And we sort of think about, okay, when we need people or they matter to us, a lot of times it's easy love. In other words, they have something that I want or something that I need. And so they matter to me and I'm nice to them and I work with them and it's to get what it is that I want. And I ask them sort of, you know, what is easy love in your life? What does it look like? And what about when people we don't like that are hard to love? That's just when fear sort of comes in. And that's when we start to see them as objects, as obstacles, as tools, as irrelevant. And when we do so, we separate in a way that makes it impossible to collaboratively problem solve. And this is where I'll do a lot of work with my clients, just asking them, in what ways is this person an obstacle to you right now in your life? In what way are they a tool? In other words, I use them. They're useful to me. But as long as they're useful to me, they're important to me. The minute that they're not useful to me, they're not important to me anymore. In what ways are they irrelevant to you? And then I always sort of ask the question, have you ever been seen as an obstacle? How does that feel? Have you ever been seen as a tool before? How does that feel? Have you ever been seen as irrelevant before? How does that feel? And a lot of times I ask them, even in the context of the relationship, have you been seen that way? Do you ever feel that way? And this is what's really fascinating to me is people can talk forever about how their partner or the person that they're working with is seeing them as an obstacle, tool, or irrelevant. They'll have tons of great examples. But then when you ask to reverse the question and say, can you think of examples where you may have seen them that way as well? A lot of times people draw blanks at first. And this is where, you know, we start doing a lot of work. And then I just sort of talk about sort of what happens next. Once we deceive ourselves that we are in conflict with it's, we face a long list of consequences. Feel like someone is seeing you and treating you as an it, how likely you see them and treat them in response. You're going to treat them that way. They're going to see you back that way. And then I take them through this exercise. Think of 2 or 3 things that in your life that annoy you or cause conflict. And then we do the conflict tornado. What do they do? What do I do back? What do they do? What do I do back? What do they do? What do I do back? And notice there's 2 things here. There's a they do, and then it means that when I see them as an object, right? I see them as an it, how do I respond? When they see me as an it, how do they respond? When I see them as an it again, how do I respond? And the conflict escalates and escalates and escalates. And I can literally have them I literally have this little tornado, have them write it in. And I just want to show a pattern. There's a red and a blue here. There's a pattern that's coming, right? There's an action and a reaction, but it's not just a behavioral reaction. It's also a deeper way of being reaction in the way that I'm seeing the other person that's causing me react. And then I ask, is that all they are? All the things nasty things that you've probably written about them now on the sheet, is that all they are? And is that the whole truth about me either, and how they see me or myself? And then I also just talk about this thing that we know really well, which is that they get allies. And so one of the things that they'll say always in conflict is, yeah, but my mother agrees with me, or my friends agree with me, or my attorney agrees with me that my ex-spouse is awful, right? And sorry, it keeps jumping. And then we sort of ask these sort of key questions at the end. If you ask me at the beginning of all this what I wanted most, what would I've said? But are the things I'm doing and the way I'm seeing that person helping me get that? And what are the costs? involved in right now, in seeing this person as an object, in engaging in this fear, conflict, tornado, and spiral. What are the costs involved? And we'll break here, and I just want to say, finally, for people that say, well, what if they are doing terrible things? What if they are abusive, emotionally, physically, sexually, and they really are doing all those hard things? My response is that then I can take appropriate behaviors and boundaries with that person, but seeing their humanity is ultimately what is going to be healing and helpful to me, even if part of seeing their humanity is that I no longer can see them, or I have a court order that's a restraining order, or that I try to have them admitted to a substance abuse problem or an anger management issue. Regardless of the behavior that I take, including boundaries, being able to see the people that we're connected to in conflict as people doesn't mean that we just have to see their good. We can also see their bad. We can see their weaknesses. We can see it clearly. We can recognize that the relationship has to change in clear and fundamental ways to protect ourselves, and frankly, and sometimes to protect them or our children or what have you. But seeing them as a person then means that all of that's done not in a vindictive way, but in a way that's going to try to help things go right for me and frankly for that other person in the future, even if it are those really sort of hard actions to take. And if I can come to that space, that I'm going to be able to see more clearly, even when they're doing bad things, that I'll be more creative in how I respond to that and how I heal from that, I'm going to be able to get to a better place in conflict than if I'm still just operating out of fear. Okay, and de-escalation just works the same way. I work with them and think about, if I saw them as a person, what would I do and how would it look different? And how can we de-escalate the conflict the other way? Okay.
Chad, can I ask a quick question before we move on?
Yeah, let's go to questions, yeah.
One question that keeps coming up for me, and I am embarrassed to admit this as a mediator, is that, when you think about systemic racism, when you think about the uprising that's happening right now, for a lot of marginalized community members, it can be challenging to see the humanity in someone else. And I know a lot, in your book, you talk about the one way to start to transform conflict is to truly try to see the humanity in the other person that you're in conflict with. And so if they can't see the humanity in you or don't recognize the humanity in you, how do you then try to start to see the humanity in them, if that makes sense?
Yeah. A lot of my work right now, thank you for that question. I mean, a lot of my work right now is working on the current social conflict in the US. I've been working a lot with Black Lives Matter. I've been working a lot with police departments. And this is a question, I just really appreciate you bringing it up, that comes up all the time, right? For so many people of color, for the police don't see them as people. That's the whole reason that they're protesting, the whole reason that they feel fear when they walk down the street, the whole reason that there's disproportionate actions that police take against some people as opposed to others. And how do I see someone as a person that has been violent to people in my community that is clearly doesn't see me back as a person? And it's really interesting, and maybe this doesn't surprise you, that when I talk to the police, they frame it almost the exact same way. People see all police as abusers. People see us as authoritarian, or that we're all racist. But so many of us are not like that. And they don't understand how hard our job is and how dangerous our job is, and the PTSD that police officers have, and sort of all those things. And how am I supposed to respond to these protesters? And when they don't see me as a person, and they want to defund my job, or they want me fired, from my job, or what have you. And so both of the parties, interestingly, sit in a space that say, I can't do it until the other side does it. If the other side were to do it, then I think I could be open to seeing the humanity, but you've got to show me first that you can do it. And, you can think about the fairness level of it coming from the protester side, right? That after a long history of systemic abuse and dehumanization, it's not fair to ask the protesters see the humanity of the police first. And when you do so, then they'll see your humanity. It seems like the most equitable and fair outcome is to say, no, 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 the police, you do that first. And then when you do that first, you can move into that space. And it, you know, unfortunately, this is where self-deception comes in all the time. As much as that makes sense to me as a mediator, and I see those arguments, it doesn't for the police. That's not how they perceive it and how they see it going forward. They don't see it as fundamentally it's their job to go first. And so this sort of gets to the next step of turning first. And one of the, to me, the hardest things to talk about with my clients in conflict. It's often the case that the person that is most interested in getting to some sort of reconciliation or transformation is the person that has been most mistreated in the conflict. I don't know about you or if that's been your experience, but most of the time, the person that's really actually trying to engage me or try to engage in a dialogue or about that is also the person that's been suffering the most because of the conflict. And one of the most unfair things in the world, I feel, is like to tell them, okay, you're going to have to turn towards the person that has mistreated you or hurt you, to be invitational to invite them into that space. And that's where I think the term dangerous love becomes, you know, really real and hits the ground. You know, for Wallace Warfield and my mentor who worked with Dr. King and King's book, Strength to Love, so much about that, King's work and why it was effective and why I think ultimately it didn't go far enough was around this idea that I have to see the humanity of the person who mistreated me, not because they deserve it, or not because they've shown it back, but because it's the only way to powerfully invite another person to see mine. When I can't see the humanity of a person, it is a powerful invitation for them to not see my humanity back, right? To see me as an object. And when I see them as a person, it's a powerful invitation to turn. And that's why this is so scary, and why I believe nonviolence is the scariest and most dangerous sort of form of protest in many ways, because you're engaging people that are using the exact opposite sort of tools and are dehumanizing in that way. But I use this this analogy. It's Brit, right? Is that right? Is it Brit? Let me just, I actually have a picture of it. Oh, there it is. I use this analogy. Imagine that there's two people standing back to back with each other and they're elbowing each other, right? They can't see each other, but they can feel each other, right? They're elbowing each other, they can feel it, but they can't see each other. So imagine for a minute I'm talking about, I don't see the humanity, I'm dehumanizing the other person, I can't see them. And now let's say that I ask the woman in the red dress, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to get out of this conflict. What would you do? And without any training, I'm going to throw this out to the audience. What do you predict that she's going to do next?
She's probably going to push back on her.
Okay, she could keep elbowing even more. I'm going to elbow you to a point that it hurts so bad that you stop elbowing me back, right? I mean, that is one sort of approach, right? I'm going to keep punishing you in this conflict to the point that you can't take it anymore, and you're going to stop. Okay, so that's one way. What else might she do?
I see someone has just written in, suggested in chat that just to walk away.
Okay, she could just walk out of the room, right? What style, but by the way, what sort of conflict style does that sound like?
Some avoidance, perhaps?
Yeah, some avoidance, right? I'm just going to leave. I'm going to get as far away from this person as possible, right? Okay, what else could she do?
I'm also seeing someone has typed in turn around.
Yeah, she could turn around. Now, what's really interesting is what typically happens next. She will actually move and turn around to try to get in front of the girl in the black and white dress, right? She'll try to get in front of her face to face, right? And if I'm the person that's up there, I usually have them do this with me. If I'm the other person up there, all I do is turn away again, and then they'll start chasing me around in a circle. And then eventually they'll get so frustrated, they'll try to grab me by the shoulders and force me to look at them, in which case I just close my eyes. right? And people will laugh and sort of frustrate or whatever. And what she's actually trying to do, I sort of say, is she's actually trying to get the girl in the black dress to see her as a person, right? I'm actually trying to get you to see me. And I think if you see me, the conflict will go away. And so then I ask them to try again. And this time, most of the time what happens is she'll turn, but she'll just face the other person's back. She's just looking at their back. She's not touching them anymore. And if it's not me, if I have another person up there, it's amazing what happens next every time they do it. When they're not feeling the person, they don't know what happened to the person. They actually can't see them. They don't know what happened to them anymore. They start moving around. They try to elbow a little bit. And eventually they start looking over their shoulder. They actually start looking at the other person to try to see where they're at or what's happened. It actually has this powerful sort of invitational space. And so we talk about this all the time. In international relations, we talk about this all the time. Who's going to be the first person to make a concession? Who's going to be the first person to say that, you know, they're willing to acknowledge that this other point is important and that I can see that and that I'm willing to work with you on that. And we call this, in my work, who's going to turn first? They're doing a video of it, right? One person turns, we call this the most dangerous food. Both people turned away. One person turns and invites the other person to turn. And I say this very somberly to people. It probably is not going to be fair if you're the first person to turn. You probably can have a list of reasons that it should be the other person that should turn. And that if they turned, that would be the most equitable or just sort of thing to do. But if you really want this bottom picture, if you really want to be in a space in a relationship where both people see each other and where both people are then able to engage in collaborative problem solving, I might be waiting forever for the other person to turn. And if I'm trying to elbow them harder to turn, it actually gives them more justification not to turn. If I'm constantly trying to force them to turn by grabbing them and sticking my face in front of their face and trying to pry their eyelids open, I'm actually inviting, again, more resistance within the person. But if I turn and create that space, in many, many cases, it becomes a powerful invitation for the other person to turn. And there's nothing fair or safe about it. And when I say it's not safe, because they may not turn, right? I could turn towards the other person. I could see their humanity. I could be vulnerable with them. They may not turn back. They may reject it. They may have built up so much justification, or there's so much pain, or there's such a lack of trust there that they're not actually going to turn back. That might be true. And then we're going to be powerfully tempted to turn back to the top. We're going to be powerfully tempted to go back to the red. Right, and say, now I have even more justification that I actually apologized, or I created this space for dialogue, or I opened up and listened, but they didn't listen back, and I go back to sort of red. And then I just sort of ask the question, which one's more likely to lead to both blue? If I stay red and they stay red, it turns to blue, or if I stay blue? Which one's more likely to happen? And in my experience over and over again, is that if even just one of the parties is willing to turn, that it often opens up such powerful space for the other person, they start to turn. And when they turn, we can start to really engage in what is real collaborative problem solving that is going to lead to that sort of space. And I understand when people are like, I'm too angry and I'm too frustrated and I'm in too much pain to turn right now. I get that. And sometimes this is not the right time or space to do this. Sometimes the anger needs to be manifest. People need to be heard. There needs to be a time and space for something. But if we're ultimately going to get to the solutions that are really going to transform our conflict, at some point, someone's going to have to turn. Then the other person is going to have to turn to get there. And if we can't get there, we get stuck in these same sort of conflict tornado patterns that just happen again and again. Britt, I don't know if that's a helpful answer to that.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think another thing that's kind of coming up for me as well is I was curious if you could speak to the importance of acknowledging harm or reconciliation plays in someone's ability to turn, or someone's ability to, again, to see the humanity in someone?
Awesome. Let me do this last little bit. I had something on reconciliation, and sorry, I'm moving through these
I'm sorry, I
slides
didn't
quickly.
you jump all over.
No, it's okay, because I think we're close to time. The last step I talk about, which is turning first, is inviting the other person to turn. And what's invitational to invite people to turn? What does that space look like that invites other people to turn? And I was deeply impacted by John Paul Lederach's reconciliation model. I don't know if any of you have read his book, Building Peace, out of United States Institute for Peace. And also some of the things that, again, Wallace Warfield and Martin Luther King sort of talk about are sort of what creates that space. But the first one that you talked about, Britt, is truth. That space is created when I can speak without justification about the way that I've hurt or harmed another person. When I can do it without giving a list of, well, yes, I did it, but here's all the reasons, and it's actually your fault or it's someone else's fault or whatever, but I can own the things that I've done that have been hurtful towards other people, when I can be accountable for that space. That is incredibly invitational to other people if we want to get them in the space to turn, to be invitational to them, to hear that I'm owning my actions and owning the things that I've said and done in the past. And I will add that it also includes owning the systemic element of this, that I participate or I benefit from the systemic elements of the conflict that have hurt you as well. And even though maybe I haven't actively participated in that part, I've benefited from it, and I'm part of that as well. It becomes powerfully invitational for the other person to turn. The second one is mercy, that I show forgiveness towards the people that have been hurtful to me in the past, that I don't hold that as a barrier towards another person. If someone's seeking forgiveness or someone's wronged me in the past, that I open up space for them to re-engage in a relationship again, that I have mercy towards them. The third one is justice, right? That if things have been taken away or people have been harmed as part of the conflict, that I'm going to do everything in my power that I can to make them whole, both including the things that I may have personally taken away or done, whether that's I've damaged your reputation, that I might have to go back out and explain to people that I didn't tell the whole truth about you, whether it's, you know, obviously in more serious conflicts where there may have been things taken or what have you from another person. I try to make them whole. And that I also participate in changing the system in a way that creates more equity and justice for people that have been harmed as well. That I don't just limit it to my own actions, but that I become an advocate for justice on a systemic level as well towards people that have been harmed. And then peace is putting into place a new system that encourages us to make sure that that creates trust so that it will never happen again. And so I'm willing to work with you to create a new way of interacting, a new way of living, a new way of engaging each other in the community, so that you can be confident that in the future, this conflict isn't just going to reoccur again. And so, for example, we talked about abuse. If I was the person that was abusive, part of peace would be that I'm going into rehab, that I'm going into anger management, that I'm going into therapy, that I'm actually working on this, and that I'm not even asking you to engage in a relationship with me or to spend time with me again until I can show you and prove to you that I've done all of the hard work necessary to be back into that space with you again, right? To build that trust, that that's not on you, that that's on me, to make those fundamental and key changes in my life going forward before I would ever ask you to be back in any sort of space with me again. And even then, if you weren't comfortable being in that space, I wouldn't hold that against you. I wouldn't re-engage back in the conflict with you, that I could understand as well that maybe the things that I've done have permanently changed the relationship, that maybe some of those boundaries need to be permanent going forward. And even though I've made these fundamental changes, it can't change the fundamental nature of our relationship going forward. And that when we engage in this sort of behavior, we invite people into that space. And so I usually do this values exercise thing where I think about 3 behaviors that support each of these values that I could engage in towards the other person, 3 behaviors that would contradict that, contradict that value, and then I'm going to choose one that I'm going to work on in each of these areas. Right? And so I'm going to just think about what is one thing that I could do to be more transparent or more truthful towards this person. What would be a behavior that contradicted? Well, I blame it on someone else, or I don't take accountability for it, or I try to blame you for something that I did for you, or I'm gaslighting. Those would be behaviors that would contradict truth, right? You know, mercy, the same thing. Justice, what is something I could do tangibly towards the person to show that I'm committed to justice, that I'm committed to trying to make you whole, or to restitution. And then in peace, what's something that I could take, maybe if it's even personal development, that I could work on. I'm reading this book right now, or I'm going to go to this workshop, or I'm going to go see a therapist, or whatever it is that I can show you that I'm working on this stuff to help you understand that this isn't going to happen again. And I think, you know, Britt, as we think about, you know, for example, community and police, for example, any sort of reconciliation process to me would have to include all of these values that not only include words, but also sort of tangible actions, behaviors that would be taking place that would help us build trust back again with each other. So, you know, a police department that says that we're not going to change anything, we're not going to do anything differently, to me is ignoring both truth, peace, and justice, right? They're ignoring sort of all 3 of those in the reconciliation process, and that would have to change. But, you know, it's interesting. Why don't they change? And the answer is the same as where we started. It's fear. I'm literally in the middle of this right now. I'm on Zoom calls constantly, working with police, and so much of it is being informed with fear. What will happen to me if I do this? Instead of asking the question, what will happen to us if we don't? What will happen to our country? What will happen to our community if we don't do this going forward? And that's the hard question. That really takes a level of love. And so what I'm doing so much right now on is working with both sides on trying to create enough space that we can get in the room together and start to collaborative problem solve. And some of that space requires helping people see the humanity of the other side. And some of it's little projects like we do with PeacePlayers, where we're actually bringing together police officers, kids, and kids in the community to play basketball together. And so that there's something that they can see collaboratively happening together that starts to create little spaces of humanization where I can sort of think through the ways and attitudes that I've had towards the other person before. And so I would also say, as mediators, a lot of times we have to get really creative in this process, and just thinking about sitting together in a room often isn't the right space or the safe space for people. We always talk about setting up a safe space for people to set in a room, but I often find that a safer space is going on a walk, or a safer space is actually meeting individually for a while and getting to a space, or a safer space is going bowling together. You'd be shocked at the sort of stuff that I do in the Middle East with people. I'm not even joking about the bowling, where we took people bowling you know, for the day, because that was safer for them than sitting in a negotiating room around a table. But that we could sit around, and we actually started talking about stuff at the bowling alley, and it just was an easier place for it to happen. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how to create those spaces for people as well. I'm really sorry. I think I'm probably way over time.
Chad, that was enlightening, and thanks, Britt, for posing that question. So well worth the time. It's I know time is precious, and we appreciate you sharing so much of yours with us today. Everything that you have shared and what you've written in your book and your work aligns so beautifully with the work of the center, and I think the philosophy and approach that we are all working to embody and share and offer to the community at large. So it's just resonating so deeply, and we really appreciate you joining us today. There's much of what you shared I think we can immediately apply in our personal relationships and self-reflection, introspection. We can apply to the places and spaces that we're showing up in the community and in our relationships. So It's exciting to hear the depth and scope of the application that that your work has allowed you to do, and inspiring and helpful reminder of how applicable these fundamental concepts are to every single relationship, no matter how complex the conflict might be. So I'm going to say firsthand, I highly recommend the book and encourage folks to certainly to purchase it, to read it. And while we're still recording, I'll say perhaps, Chad, there would be an opportunity for you to join us again in the future. This has been wonderful. And I hope that we can all continue to dive into what you have to offer here. And thank you so much for your time today. It was really fabulous.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate especially working with people that are out on the ground, you know, trying so hard to resolve conflict with people. I know what a hard job it is. I also want to tell you that I have a Dangerous Love podcast where I have mediators and conflict professionals on all the time to talk about conflict. If you would ever be interested in coming on the podcast with me and having a conversation about your work, I find it's really helpful for people, right? And so the podcast is generally designed to getting, you know, two conflict professionals on talking about very specific. So we've had it with parenting, we've had it with marriage, we've had a number of things around Black Lives Matter. We just had one last week was around a professional that works with people with eating disorders and sort of how they've worked through some of those, you know, issues. And so if you're ever interested in that from my end and would like to talk about your practice or the work that you're doing and think that you could be helpful for others, just send me an email and we'll get you on at some point, and we'll just have a discussion together, because I want to share these concepts with people and really help them understand. I think there's so much that they can do on their own, and when they can't, hiring a professional, hiring a mediator, whatever, is just, it's not a shameful thing. It's a really helpful, important thing going on. So I really appreciate your work. Would love to work with you again, and maybe if we can get a vaccine going, I can actually come up. I have a daughter that lives in Seattle, so I'm in Washington a lot.
Fantastic. Well, count us in. We'll keep the conversation going. And a giant thank you to Becca for creating the link to you and bringing you to us. And we would be delighted to keep the relationship and conversation going. And thanks so much for your time and wisdom today. We appreciate it deeply.
All right, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.